There's different levels of studying animal behavior. Basically, it can either be via anecdotes or actual science. And so that's what we're going to be looking at here. So let's start with the anecdotal level. Anecdotes are actually short accounts of interesting events that are based on casual, non-quantitative, non-scientific observations of animals. They're often things that people just kind of stumble upon, but nonetheless, they could provide a basis for subsequent scientific investigation. Here's an example. This is a book, a semi-popular book, written by the Nobel Prize-winning ethologist Konrad Lorenz, called King Solomon's Ring, first published in 1952. Now, he intended this book as a way to popularize ethology, the study of animal behavior, to the general public. And so there's no science in here per se. It's just loaded with all kinds of anecdotes.
I once let a fat white farmyard duck hatch out mallards, and the little wild things ran just as happily after her as if she had been their real mother. The secret must have lain in her call note, for, in external appearance, the domestic duck was quite as different from a mallard as was the muscovy, but what she had in common with the mallard, which, of course, is the wild progenitor of our farmyard duck, were her vocal expressions. Though, in the process of domestication, the duck has altered considerably in color pattern and body form, its voice has remained practically the same. The inference was clear. I must quack like a mother mallard in order to make the little ducks run after me.
So that's an example of an anecdote from King Solomon's Ring, and actually there is some good information there, and it has to do with that last sentence, I must quack like a mother mallard in order to make the little ducklings run after me. And in fact, what he's actually referring to is what was later studied by other scientists as the acoustic basis of species identification in ducklings, and also as how that relates to imprinting, the development of social attachments. So this is a good example of how an anecdotal statement has actually led to very nice scientific investigations. So what are the sources of some anecdotes? Well, bird watchers, for example, they are a great source because they take this hobby very, very seriously. I mean, they keep accurate records of what it is they've seen, where they've seen them, the weather conditions in which they've seen them, all kinds of valuable information. And of course, embedded within that information are observations of their behavior patterns. And the same with hunters. Look, if you're going to be hunting animals, you got to know something about their behaviors. You got to know something about their anti-predator behaviors because you as the hunter are the predator. You got to know something about what might attract them to a particular location so that you can more efficiently hunt them, like these duck hunters.
Good dog.
Also had to train the dog, obviously, to fetch the prey. So hunters, another good source of anecdotes because they treat that hobby quite seriously. Animal breeders, if you're going to breed animals in captivity, you got to know a lot about the reproductive capabilities of those organisms, what will foster reproductive behavior, what might inhibit it, and therefore you got to avoid those things. In other words, you need to know a lot about their behavior in terms of reproduction in captivity. Animal breeders. Also, guess what? The internet. So if you Google just some general terms like animal, whatever, animal, anecdotes of animals. There we go. I think that's what I may have Googled here. And I end up with this book. And it's an ancient book. Oh my gosh. And well, let's see. We'll click on mice as navigators. And then it brings up this portion of the book. So this book is loaded with anecdotes. And you'll find another bunch of sources on the internet, many sources on the internet of animal anecdotes. It just depends on what kind of search term you enter. So these are potential sources of information for further scientific investigation. But there are problems with anecdotes, and we have to acknowledge these problems. The first is observer bias. If you're out there watching an animal, you're not necessarily a scientist, you're not trained in naturalistic observation, and you may have your own biases because you're a human being and we all have our own biases. And your reports could be loaded with all kinds of things that are inaccurate based on what it is you think you saw that really did not happen. And also, people who report anecdotes rarely entertain alternative explanations of what it is they've seen. They sort of latch on to a pet hypothesis about what's going on, and they don't consider other alternatives. Also, and this is a huge problem, sometimes the anecdotes are reconstructed long after the observation was actually made. And so when this happens, there's all kinds of opportunities for inaccuracies to work their way into these descriptions and all kinds of other biases to work their way in. So that's a huge problem with anecdotes. And of course, they tend to be anthropomorphic, where a person would typically tend to ascribe human qualities to a non-human organism. And we'll have more of that later on, like right now. So, anthropomorphism, attributing human characteristics to non-human organisms. Don't confuse this with anthropocentrism, which was discussed in another segment, because anthropocentrism is where we tend to view ourselves as the center of the universe and compare animals against us, the clever things that we do, for example. Anthropomorphism is looking at an organism and just attributing human attributes to that organism, usually in rather ridiculous ways. For example, look at this.
Oh my god, that's so cute.
They're holding hands.
Oh, look at that.
Absolutely adorable.
Look, they're coming back together. Yeah. Okay. Look.
Notice that had a huge awe factor. They're holding hands. Oh my gosh, they're dating. Even worse, look at this.
We'll put the lay on first. Oh, look at that. Oh, darling, you're marvelous. Look. Okay, why don't you throw a scruff on him?
I feel so badly for this poor ferret.
I think ferret owners are different from other sorts of owners in that ferrets being so incredibly playful. It takes a playful person to really hook into that. Maybe somebody who's almost childlike in their sense of play. Oh, look at the shimmy. He's got the movement. He's got the motion.
Well, now we have a Senorita Fandango. Hey, more beer here. Green beer for me and all my friends.
That poor animal. Oh my God, those people should be put away. And, then there's the usual ads or examples of anthropomorphism, like we use a bear to prevent forest fires. And we use a tiger to sell cereal. Now, here is a survey that was done way back in 1980. It would really be nice if somebody were to update this. What they did was to ask a lot of people nationwide in the United States what animals they like and what animals they dislike. So give it some thought. Think about some animals you like. Think about some animals you dislike. And if you want, you can actually pause this and jot some ideas down about animals you like and animals you dislike. So if you want to do that, do it right now. Okay, so here are animals that people like. Starting with number 13, working our way down to number 1. Raccoons, ladybugs, cats, turtles, elephants, eagles, salmon, trout, butterflies, robins, swans, and horses. What's the number 1 animal? You can probably guess because it's not in the list. Dogs. You know what? I bet cats would probably be closer to dogs if we were to do this survey nowadays. Because remember, this was done in 1980. With the internet and all the cute YouTube videos of cats, I have a feeling that cats are liked more now than they might have been back around 1980. Whatever. Anyway, what about animals you dislike? People don't like wolves or coyotes or crows. Lizards, skunks, probably for good reason. Sharks, vultures, bats, rattlesnakes, wasps, rats, and mosquitoes. Now, what do you think is the number 1 animal that people dislike? Any guesses? Well, here it comes. Cockroaches. People don't like cockroaches, at least back in 1980. Okay, so this obviously is the kind of thing that's going to color the way that people view different animals, especially in terms of anthropomorphizing them. I mean, they'll probably anthropomorphize things like wolves, coyotes, crows, and all these other disliked animals as being horrible type creatures, evil, and animals that are out to get us, as opposed to the animals that people like, that are going to be wonderful and help us. By the way, where are dolphins? It just dawned on me that there are no dolphins in the like list. Isn't that strange? Oh well, whatever. Speaking of aquatic animals, here are some of the world's deadliest animals. Okay, so we're going to look at this in reality now because we have some data on the number of humans that have been killed per year. These data are recent as I think about 2013 or 2014. Only 10 people, these are worldwide deaths, okay? Only 10 people have been killed by sharks worldwide. Wolves, 10 people. Lions, 100 people. Oh my gosh. Elephants, 100 people. Hippopotamus, 500 people. Hippopotamuses are rather vicious animals, by the way. Crocodiles, 1,000 people. Tapeworms, 2,000 people. Ascaris roundworms, 2,500 people. Freshwater snails, 10,000 people. Assassin bugs, 10,000 people. Tsetse flies, 10,000 people. I mean, these animals give us various diseases is the problem. Dogs, 25,000 people are killed per year by domestic dogs. Go figure. Not my dog. Snakes, 50,000 people. And guess what? Humans, 475,000 people are killed by members of our own species. You think that's the big one right there? Nope. There's one that's worse than us. And it's hard to do anything about it. Mosquitoes. 725,000 people. Very interesting when you think about things like wolves and coyotes and stuff like that. Think about mosquitoes and think about members of our own species next time you think about what the deadliest animals might be. Okay, let's move on to the scientific level. There's different aspects of what we call the scientific level because there's different ways of doing science. I mean, you could just do straightforward observation and description. You can do experimentation. And you can also use non-human organisms as models for humans in various disciplines. So let's look at these with some examples. By the way, for the use of models, that's done with the idea that you can generalize from non-human organisms to humans. And that is very, very tricky, by the way. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And you don't always know when you're able to do that. And that is a huge problem. But nonetheless, we have little else to go by. Now, the factors that affect the extent to which you can generalize from non-human organisms to humans is based on the degree of phylogenetic relatedness, as well as the ecological niches of the organism. So, we might be phylogenetically more related, well, we are, to chimpanzees, for example, and bonobos, but we also inhabit niches that might be more similar to, say, rats and pigeons, because they inhabit niches that are incredibly variable, just like the kind of niches we inhabit. So there's different aspects to the way we can generalize from us to non-human organisms, rather, to us. But they're based on different factors. And so it depends really on what it is you're trying to generalize to, why you're trying to generalize to it. And it's a very tricky business. It really, really is, and can be sometimes problematic. Look at this. Saccharin. Now, long before you were born, back in the 1950s and 60s, saccharin was the only artificial sweetener available on the market. So if you didn't want to use sugar, you used saccharin. You would mix that in coffee or whatever, okay? Well, people started doing some research on saccharin using rats. So they gave saccharin to rats, and they found that it caused cancer in rats. Rats are dying. So at that point, they decided to take saccharin off the market. Interestingly, about, 2 decades later, some people decided, let's look at this not in rats, but in another rodent. We'll look at it in mice. Turns out, it did not cause cancer in mice. Should they really have taken it off the market? Who knows? It's just that there was limited generalizability. You couldn't even generalize from one rodent species to another. So could you generalize from rats to humans? Could you generalize from mice to humans? Who knows? It's a game that nobody actually wanted to play. So they came up with alternatives like NutraSweet and all these other ones that are available today that are non-saccharin based. Okay, let's look at some examples of models, using animals as models for humans. This is a great example, I think. This is the African gray parrot. Its name was Alex, trained by Irene Pepperberg. Alex unfortunately died rather suddenly. And before that happened, Irene Pepperberg was able to do a lot of research with Alex, as well as some other African gray parrots that came after Alex. So what she did, because she was interested in non-human organism cognitive capabilities, was to actually train Alex and the other parrots that were part of her projects via a modeling technique where the parrots observed two humans interacting. The parrots are pretty smart, so they're able to catch on when they see two humans interacting with one another, asking one another questions, answering those questions, and so on and so forth. And then what Irene did was to ask the parrots to do the same thing that the parrots saw the humans doing. And this also turned out to have implications for child learning disabilities, as we see here.
How smart is Alex?
He can do the same types of tasks as young children, as chimpanzees and dolphins.
Okay.
We don't know if he thinks in the same way we do. We just know that we get the same kind of answers that, say, a young child would give. What color?
This is 4-year-old Griffin, who's learning the same way Alex learns.
Oh, it's confusing. I know. What color?
He watches humans model what they want them to do.
No. What color?
Yellow.
Yeah.
There may be some practical use for these years of work with Alex and the others.
What do you think's so funny?
Diane Sherman is a bird lover who once heard Irene Pepperberg give a speech.
And I thought, this is a nice technique. I think it's going to work for a variety of kids, for a variety of learning experiences.
Diane, would you like to play with the car?
I'd like to play with the car.
You need to look at me and ask me if you can play with it.
What?
Diane is an occupational therapist in Monterey, California, who thinks Irene's techniques
like to play with
work
the
with
car,
children
please.
who have learning disabilities.
Diane, would you like to play with the car?
48 Hours arranged a session for this 10-year-old learning disabled child to see the therapy working.
Nice, quiet hand.
Coincidentally, the boy's name is also Alex.
If a child gets overly excited by the environment, do you like to play with the car? Oh, yes! Spinning, flapping, crying, yelling. If we script them and tell them what to say, it doesn't work.
Using the same kind of modeling we saw with the
You
birds,
tell me what color?
Yellow.
Yellow. You get the yellow wall.
they teach Alex to use the appropriate behavior to get the toy car.
Quiet hands. Diane, would you like to play with the car?
I'd like to play with the car. Thank you. I get to play with the car. Alex, would you like to play with the car?
Yeah.
Nice quiet hands, thank you. Make it go forward. There you go, there you go. Other way, yeah. Did a great job, did you know that?
By the way, I apologize for the quality of some of these video clips. Some of them are things that I digitized some years ago, and the source material no longer exists. So we're using whatever we can, but they're good examples of the kind of points that I'm trying to make. Alex, by the way, also ended up helping to train other parrots that Irene Pepperberg was working with.
Alex is so good at his tasks that he's helping train other parrots in the lab.
Griffey, come on, what matter? Paper, that's right. You can say better. But you're right, good boy. Alex, can you show him how it's clear? Can you say it better? Say it nice and clear for him. Paper, that's right. And at one point, we were really shocked because during a session that was actually filmed for a local TV group, Alex responded to Griffin's sort of incompetent little ear with a very clear, talk clearly. And it was really quite exciting and shocking and wonderful.
Hate it when Alex becomes a smart aleck. But nonetheless, this has been a very lucrative project for Irene Pepperberg, and she continues to do this work to this very day. Aplysia, a sea hare, has served as a model for looking at synaptic transmission because they have rather large neurons, meaning they have very large synapses, and people are able to actually see what kind of neurotransmitters are being secreted across the synapses while the animal is actually doing various simple forms of learning tasks. Aplysia, the sea hare. Rhesus monkeys have served as a model for looking at depression. This is primarily the work of Harry Harlow, which is actually quite old. It goes back to the 1950s, where he had monkeys that were separated from their mothers, that were raised on surrogate monkeys, either cloth mothers for comfort or wire mothers for which didn't have any comfort but might have provided nourishment. And in some cases, depending on the rearing situation, actually induced varying states of depression. So had to create the depression in order to figure out ways of reversing it. And so here is a very old film from Harlow's lab.
This is the laboratory of psychologist Harry Harlow.
Distressed, permanently deprived.
He is studying monkeys to better understand human relationships.
He may die for want of love.
Harlow believes he can use science to study love. With a series of pioneering experiments, he explores territory where few scientists have ventured. Harlow is studying love because he believes it makes an indelible impact on a young life. The relationship between a mother and her child what Harlow calls our earliest social environment, could hold the key to explaining behavior throughout life. Harlow designs a set of ingenious experiments. He raises a baby monkey, allowing it to choose between two surrogate mothers, a wire mother that feeds it, and a cloth mother that doesn't. A cloth mother that Harlow thinks might provide something else, comfort and love.
Here's baby 106, weaned on a wire mother. He's going to the wire mother.
But this infant quickly runs to the cloth mother, where he will stay for the next 18 hours cuddling. In Harlow's mind, choosing nurturing over sustenance. In another experiment, Harlow creates a fearful situation. Whom does the infant turn to now?
Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him. He's scared, all right. And he does what any child will do in a similar situation. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear.
To Harlow, there is something about the experience of comfort and love, even more than food, that seems crucial to all these monkeys. But what happens when the infant is raised alone, without any mother at all, wire or cloth? In this situation, the orphan monkey stays alone. He won't even go to the cloth mother when frightened, but retreats into his own world. Harlow believes he has shown how want of love can damage an infant for life, and he worries the same is true for people.
What comes through loud and clear in Harry Harlow's experiment was that the early experience and the environment were crucial to the healthy development of the infant child, and that in a sense, if you messed up, if the right kind of maternal presence was not there during the critical years, then that infant might grow up to be an adult incapable of forming healthy relationships with other kinds of people.
Be aware these studies were done back in the 1950s, maybe on a little bit into the 60s. They would be very difficult to do today, given the tightening up of animal welfare types of regulations that we have in research. But nonetheless, they proved very helpful in terms of inducing states of depression, so that then ways could be determined to figure out how to alleviate these states of depression. And we'll be revisiting this much, much later in the course. Self-healing mice. Wow, another great model for what could happen in terms of various human types of conditions.
This mouse may not look scary, but it has an ability that's usually limited to horror films and video games. It can naturally regrow body parts.
I think it's interesting and exciting that that mammals may have not lost the ability to regenerate.
As reported in Discover magazine, biologist Ellen Heber-Katz discovered the animal's regenerating ability accidentally. Researchers routinely keep track of lab mice using unique ear piercings, but the cancer researchers at Philadelphia's Wistar Institute saw that one strain of mouse completely regrew this tissue after 4 weeks.
When we went back to look at the mice, to look at the different groups of mice, there were no ear holes. So we couldn't distinguish one mouse from another. So it was quite amazing.
In further experiments, these so-called healer mice also regrew tissue in the tail, the optic nerve of the eye, the toes, and even the heart.
After an injury to the heart in the healer mouse, the heart, after 60 days, recovers completely, whereas our control mouse shows severe scar formation and very little healing.
The healer mice also don't form scar tissue, which can prevent the replacement of damaged cells with new ones. While she cautions that research in mice doesn't always translate to people, Heber-Katz hopes that studying how these mice repair themselves might lead to ways to enhance our own healing abilities.
So that's very promising, and of course we now have a lot of stem cell research going on that also is sort of leading us in the same direction of repairing damage to various parts of the body, especially the nervous system. This creature is a tardigrade, and they are in the phylum Tardigrada. They are an interesting model of adaptation because they can survive almost everything, and they're found almost everywhere. They're also known as water bears. So there's about 1,100 species within this phylum, and they're very small, about 1 millimeter long. So, if you go looking for them, you'll probably need at least a magnifying glass. They're found, like I said, everywhere. They're found in freshwater, saltwater. There's terrestrial versions of these guys. And the thing about them is they can survive unbelievably extreme conditions. There was a European experiment that was done in space where they sent some up on a rocket and they actually exposed them to what otherwise would be lethal levels of radiation coming from the sun directly. They went into this state of cryptobiosis, which is sort of like a reversible suspension of metabolism. It's almost a death-like state, but they're not dead. And, they came right back to life, and they survived. They behaved normally. They reproduced. There was nothing wrong with them. And back on Earth, people have tried to do all kinds of harm to them. I mean, of course, if you squish them with a hammer, they're not going to survive that. But, they can survive a lot of extreme conditions. They even gave them more radiation when they came back to Earth, and they snapped right out of that. So, there's a lot of concern, obviously, about nuclear plants and escaping radiation and all this kind of stuff. And so it would seem that the water bear, the tardigrade, would be a very interesting model in terms of trying to figure out how they can survive these extreme conditions. By the way, they themselves eat mostly plants and bacteria, rotifers, and also other tardigrades. So there you go. So what do they look like? Well, I showed you one picture already. This is their anatomy. It's a pretty complex anatomy for a 1 millimeter long animal. But, just looking at this, you can see that just about everything is there that should be there. The head region is over here. The back region is over here. Here is a 3D version of one that was photographed using special cameras. So we're looking at the head. You can see claws on the bottom. And here is a movie. We're looking from the bottom up. So this is the bottom of the tardigrade. As it's sort of lumbering along, you can see the eyes up front, some internal organs. My guess is that could be part of the digestive tract because you can also see the rectum at the back of the animal. You can see the claws as it's just kind of lumbering along on this surface. So, a very interesting potential model for studying adaptation, especially in relationship to surviving radiation exposure. Tardigrades. Deformed frogs. There were various deformities that were discovered in ponds, I think originally in Minnesota, but then elsewhere throughout North America and actually the entire world, because part of the problem with amphibians is their skin is rather porous and they can absorb various elements that are in the environment. And that includes all kinds of toxins that are in the ponds in which they inhabit. And so there's all these kinds of deformities like missing limbs and various other types of horrendous types of monstrosities that have been showing up in these various frogs. Notice over here we have two various limbs that are stemming off of one limb. Just looking at a situation in a pond in Vermont, looking at 126 frogs with missing and partial limbs, 65% missing or shortened digits, 21%. Other types of deformities, 14%. It's turned out to be quite a problem. So people have been looking at this as a way of trying to deal with what we can do in terms of alleviating the environment of these various chemical compounds, because worldwide it's become a huge problem. These are data from 2008, and you can see that about a third of 5,700 frog, toad, and salamander species have become endangered, and 200 have become extinct within the last 30 years of 2008 alone, because of things like habitat loss and funguses that have gone into the skins of these animals and caused horrendous kinds of deformities. This is an experiment that kind of illustrates the kind of thing that I'm pointing to that was published in 2001. So what they did was to look at tadpoles in a laboratory situation. And they had different conditions where there was a tadpole and there was a salamander, which is a predator of a tadpole, or the absence of the predator. And the tadpoles were exposed to very low doses, by the way, of this chemical carbaryl, which the trade name is 7. You may have heard of it as 7. And then they looked at the survival of the tadpoles. Again, these are very low doses. And look at what happens here. So we have one condition. There's a tadpole. There's no caged salamander in the water with the tadpole. So the tadpole is alone in the water. But you introduce a low dose of this chemical, and what happens is nothing. The tadpole survives. Now, what happens if you have your tadpole, but you put a caged salamander in the water with the tadpole? So it's caged, so it can't get to the tadpole. And then you have the same level of dose, very low dose of 7, you have low survival. What seems to be going on here is that there are chemicals, probably various pheromones, that are being emitted by the salamander, that are being picked up by the tadpole, that are causing all kinds of horrendous stress reaction. Various stress hormones are probably being released in the tadpole that are affecting its survivability when encountering the chemical 7, even though it's in very low doses. So people are doing this kind of research using animals as models to try to figure out how we can deal with, in this case, conservation issues. In some of the other examples, ways of generalizing from non-human organisms to humans. So these are some of the ways that people have been studying animal behavior based upon whether or not they're interested in the anecdotal level or the scientific level.